Chapter 23. When Jovani stepped out of his car, Connor stood next to him. Both magnificent-looking men. One mortal and one immortal. Jovani and Connor, dressed in black tux and white shirts with gold cufflinks, clambered out and strode to the front door. Connor, a handsome young man, but he couldn't touch the likes of Jovani, whose gleaming hair and staggering blue eyes could charm the heart of any woman. The contours of Jovani's face powerful and dark against the background of moonlight and street lamps. He raised his head and sniffed the air, and knew instinctively that Hannah had been brought here to this place. The driver, Connor's brother, had agreed to make extra money by driving that one night. The money was too good to turn down. But he would earn every bit of it. He knew Connor worked for a rich businessman, but he never asked what Connor did, and Connor never spoke of it. After the brother stepped out to open the car door, he looked up at the splendor of the stately mansion and smiled. When Connor's brother first met Jovani, it was because Jovani had rescued Connor from the streets and somehow cured him of his drinking and saved his life. That's all he knew of this rich business, and all he wanted to know, that Connor was healthy again, and Connor had come back to them, and they could tell their mother that he was okay, and she didn't have to worry about him anymore. With his invitation in his pocket, Jovani and Connor sauntered to the door. The man at the door glanced up at Jovani. "I recognize you. I don't think the invitation was meant to go to you." "What are you telling me?" Jovani said. "That you are capable of stopping me from entering a home I own?" The man's eyes grew wide and his hands shook when he took the invitation. "Of course not. I wouldn't suggest anything like that. I was making an observation." He stepped aside and Jovani and Connor strode into the castle. "Much the way I remember. It was here I asked Sasha to marry me. That was a mistake I will regret to this day, and it has only been 100 years. Jovani's eyes glanced up the winding staircase. "I'm sorry to hear that you regretted fucking me that night. From what I remember, you couldn't get enough of my blood." Jovani turned quickly. With the noise and his thoughts masking his acute senses, he didn't hear Sasha. He didn't smell until she was on him. She stood amidst a crowd of vampires who covered her scent. She stood before Jovani looking as beautiful as ever, but he couldn't see it because he loathed her, and she is the one who could destroy his last chance to find happiness. Gazing around at Sasha, Jovani noticed that she had surrounded herself with beautiful young men and women who satisfied her lust for her carnal and animalistic urges. He recognized them as being some of the most prominent in the vampire circles, but not conspicuous among humans. They kept a low profile in the human population, but it became hard for Jovani because they sought him out because of his wealth, and plastered his face on the front pages of papers and magazines throughout the world. None of the young beautiful vampires were as rich as he, none were as strong as he, and none were as handsome as he. They were turned at the same time and none were over 100 years, and that made Jovani the oldest by a few months or years and the strongest. He needed that edge if he were to survive this night. Sasha knew of Jovani's strength and prowess, and although she tasted and engaged the young vampires in sexual games and fed their need for human blood during sex, she wasn't satisfied. The only one who could satisfy her lust was Jovani, and he no longer wanted her. Maybe it was her fault, but nonetheless, she desired him with a passion, and would never let any human woman have him. And the non-humans knew better than to compete for him. The world was littered with the corpses of dead women who had made love to Jovani, or wanted to make love to him. Sasha immediately noticed Connor. "He's not one of us. He's my friend." "Vampires do not human friends. But if you want to fool yourself with that notion, go ahead," she said, laughing. Jovani glanced around the room at all the young vampires standing and pretending to drink champagne for the benefit of the servants. Because there were few servants and many vampires, Jovani brought Connor along, and surely there were others who weren't turned like Connor. "I have to speak to Connor, excuse me, Sasha." Still a gentleman. That will do your undoing. Jovani didn't reply. He took Connor to the side and said, I'm going to entertain and distract Sasha, find out if Hannah is here and where she can be found. Connor turned and strolled through the crowd of vampires, and they swiveled around as if he was a beautiful woman walking through a crowd of men. His blood would be the culmination of a wonderful evening. Because Connor belonged to Jovani, they couldn't touch him without Jovani agreeing. As Connor looped through a swarm of vampires, their fangs fell, and they hissed at his smell in anticipation and desire for this handsome human. Heading in the direction of the restrooms, he saw a large wooden door, and across from it, the theater where the entertainment would be held. It was obviously a dressing room. Down the dark hallway, a man or vampire, he couldn't tell which, stood in front of a door with his arms crossed, as if guarding it. That had to be the place where Hannah was kept, he thought. Knowing the vampire's attraction for humans and their blood, Connor sauntered up and stood in front of the man. Do you have a light? Connor said, pulling out a cigarette. He had stopped smoking along with his drinking a few years ago, but kept it for a security blanket, not expecting to use it. I don't smoke, the man said, mumbling. As Connor got a better look at the man, he knew that he wasn't an immortal. He had a surly, uneven look about him. A hard look like he had been hired to be a bodyguard, and he could keep secrets. The bodyguard, a large man with large arms and wide shoulders, didn't smile and kept his arms crossed. You shouldn't be here. Aren't you here for the auction? Do you think I could get a look at the merchandise to see if my master wants to spend his evening here? I need to tell him that it's worth the money, or whether he's wasting time on this when he could be out hunting for younger meat. She's worth it. I don't know about the pregnant one. Personally, I don't get it. But then what do I know? I'm just human. Give me a good steak and I'm good for the evening. He smiled, and Connor smiled wide too. Just let me take a peek in, and then I'll recommend you to my master. He has a need for a good bodyguard who can keep secrets. Then Connor pulled out 2 new crisp $100 bills and stuffed it into his palm. The bodyguard glanced down and hurriedly opened the door. I'll need time, Connor said, to inspect the merchandise. Connor walked into the room, and Gabriella had her back to him. She felt his presence and turned quickly. She stood naked as she placing the dark blood-red gown over her head. Connor, with his mouth opened. What are you doing in here? Can't you see they're planning to sell me? If you're here to get me out of this place, then fine. If not, get the fuck out of here. I do have rights. And soon I will belong to one of those animals out there, and I'll tell them what you did to me. I plan on surviving this shit. So get out of here. I haven't done anything to you, and I'm here with Jovani. I'm his servant. Gabriella finished pulling and straightening her gown. It's about time that vampire arrived. I thought I would have to fuck one of those creatures first and become one of them. I'm not going to let anyone turn you or fuck you. Good. But first I have to kill that vampire bitch and her witch. That will not be easy. It was easy getting in here, and why should it be hard getting out and doing that? Just bribe whoever it takes. She walked to the dresser with her purse setting on it, and reached inside and pulled out her holy water and steak. I'm going to kill that bitch for doing this to me. I've never been this afraid in my life, and I don't like it. My mother will hunt all these hidden vampires and demolish these old castles and build apartments over them. Gabriella spoke in a small, frantic voice. Her voice rising and lowering, and then tears falling down her face. Connor pulled her to him and wiped the tears from her eyes. Where's Hannah? We have to find Hannah. Jovani is looking for her, and he won't leave until he has her, and I can't leave until then. Still in Connor's arms, holding on to him, Gabriella glanced up and said, Don't leave me for a second. I'm not used to this. I didn't know until recently that there were vampires and witches. I thought it was something in the movies, but they are real, and they are out to destroy us." He brought her face up to look into his eyes. "Not all of them are bad. But most are. We will get out of here. I'll get you out, trust me." Connor walked to the door with Gabriella holding on to the edge of his coat, and when he opened the door, he called in the bodyguard. "Do you want to make a lot of money?" "What is a lot of money?" "Do you know who Jovani Nightingale is?" "He's the richest man in the world." "Precisely, and they have his woman and baby. If you want to live to see the next day and become rich beyond your dreams, tell me where they're keeping his pregnant woman." After the bodyguard agreed to tell Connor everything, Connor said, nodding to Gabriella, "Take her around the back. I know there's a back entrance. All these old castles have back doors leading out to the street or courtyard. There you will find my brother. He should be standing in front of a black Lincoln SUV. It's the only one out there. This is my woman. Put her in it and tell my brother to wait for me. And you get in it with her. If I'm not out in an hour, leave me." "No. You can't do that alone," Gabriella said. "Am I really yours now?" "If you want to be." Gabriella glanced at Connor and shook her head and said, "Yes. Yes. I want to be yours." Never had she met anyone like him. Someone who would rescue her from the excitement she craved. But now she found it too taxing on her nerves, and she needed some downtime. And she knew with whom she would spend that time with: Connor. Brian and Chase couldn't compare to this man, she thought, as she turned and waved, walking away from him. Maybe it was because she had never been in such a mess in her life that she created, and her parents couldn't get her out of, which played in her mind. She saw Connor as her white knight riding to the rescue. Everyone needs a white knight, and she needed to be rescued from these monsters like yesterday, and here he is, and she fell in love with what she thought she needed at the time: a handsome stranger who wasn't afraid to take her from the clutches of witches and vampires.